You're listening to Blackpool Church Podcast. Join us for our Sunday gatherings to make friends, explore faith and encounter God. Visit our website, blackpool.church. This is
I've always said that if I was going to do a speech here at the church that I would want to start it like that. So thank you for humouring me. Today, as mentioned, we are continuing our series, Seeing Jesus in the Old Testament. Looking today at the latter part of Exodus, the book of Numbers, but also the book of Leviticus, overall looking at the Tabernacle. So, as we've already mentioned multiple times before, a lot of our church family this week are at Focus. For those of you who haven't been to Focus, I just wanted to paint a little bit of a picture of what it's like. Imagine loads of fields. Good start. And in the fields are every single size and type of tent you can imagine. Marquees, there are thousands of tents here. And within the centre of Focus, there is almost like a hub, which includes a fun fair. There's a kids area with bouncy castles and activities. There's a youth section. Most importantly, there are some amazing food stalls. If you ever go the Greek food, brilliant, really would recommend. But obviously the reason why people go to Focus is their faith. So there are loads of Christian talks, gatherings and sermons. One of my favourites is one that Andy mentioned, which is called The Big Top. I want you to imagine the biggest tent you've ever seen. It is probably 5-6 times the size of this building and probably about as high. It is a massive tent with thousands of Christians worshipping together, meeting with the risen God and hearing the Bible. The noise is unbelievable when it gets going, like the biggest party you've ever been to. But meeting God in a tent is not an idea that Focus has created, nor one that we've come across in this century. That dates back up to 2,000 years ago. But first things first, who here, by show of hands, enjoys camping? Oh, there are some good campers in here. Brilliant. Who doesn't enjoy camping? Yeah, I'm one of you. I am very much not a good camper. I will say that. To prove this, I have brought along some props. This is what I normally bring camping. You'll have to correct me if it's wrong. So I have a chopping board. I have a candlestick. No candle, just the candlestick. I've got some wax melts, because why not? Matches, always missing them on a camping trip, and a washing up bowl. Obviously, all of the main camping essentials there. So obviously, this is a particularly random list, maybe missing some important things like a tent, a pillow, maybe a phone charger. But each of these objects, which are on the stage now, link to how the Israelites reached God in the Old Testament. So we're going to go all the way back to halfway through Exodus. And the Israelites are a people who have just escaped Egypt after 400 years of slavery. Now, after escaping Egypt, they wandered around for a long time in the desert. Bearing in mind, this was 2,000 years ago. There were no Airbnbs. There were no hotels. These people were camping. And after the slavery that they suffered at the hands of the Egyptians, they wanted God's reassurance, the reassurance that God was with them and hadn't abandoned them. And God also wanted the Israelites to reach him, to build a relationship that they hadn't had for these hundreds of years. So God gave the Israelites, these people, instructions to build a tabernacle. Can we all say the word tabernacle? Tabernacle. It's a fun word to say, isn't it? It's based off the Greek word shini, which means a tent, a place of meeting, or a temporary dwelling. So tabernacle, that is the word to remember today. For the Israelites, it was a physical space where they could encounter God and be reminded of his power and glory during their travels in the desert. So a physical space where they could encounter God. And God gave very specific instructions for the tabernacle. This was down to the entire length, what was be inside of it. There is a lot of detail that he goes into in the tabernacle, about 3 Bible books worth. I was going to read it all out to you, but I thought that might have been a bit too much this morning, so I will summarize. If you do, however, want some homework, I would recommend Exodus chapters 25 to 27 for a step-by-step guide on how to build your own tabernacle. If someone's looking for a summer project, it should only take you a couple of months or so on your own. You'll need some goat hair, a little bit of gold, lots of curtains. You'll be all right, you'll be fine. So, although God gave the instructions for the Israelites to build this tabernacle, the Israelites wanted it. They asked to reach God, and the way to do that was through the building of this tent, this tabernacle. And they were willing to work for it. Every single person in the camp donated something to the building of the tabernacle, whether that be their gold, their precious jewels, their resources, their work, animal hides, their skills, their trade. There were over 600,000 people in the Israelite camp, up to 2 million if you include women and children. If every single person gave one thing to that tabernacle, it would be the most amazing tent in the world. Can you also imagine breaking down that camp and putting it back up again? How efficient would that be? 2 million people. Anyone who knows me knows I love efficiency. Now, at the moment, this feels a lot like a history lesson. Don't know who liked history in school. I personally did, but you're not here for the history lesson. It is important to know that context, which is the history of the time, is important when we look at the Bible. So first things first, we're going to look about how the Israelites 2,000 years ago could reach the presence of God and about how Jesus links into that. So this is when our young people come into their own and us older people need to work a little bit more. We're going to use our imaginations. We ready? So imagine we are Israelites. Congratulations, guys. Where can we find the presence of God as Israelites? Fancy word I said earlier. Can anyone remember it? Tabernacle, perfect. We as Israelites find the presence of God in the tabernacle. Now, where in this massive sprawling camp of thousands of tents would we choose to put the tabernacle? I don't know about you, but I have definitely been wandering around campsites in my pajamas and my Wellington boots looking for the toilet in the middle of the night. I don't think the Israelites would have been doing that potentially. So where would the Israelites put the most important tent of them all? Any ideas? In the middle, in the center, absolutely. So the tabernacle was built in the center of the Israelites' camp. Just as God wants to be the center of the lives of the Israelites, he wants to be the center of our lives now. So let's go into more of the structure of the tabernacle. Does anyone know what a Russian doll is? A few different people. For those who don't, I have got an illustration up on the board. This is a Russian doll. The idea is that you've got a center of the Russian doll, but to get to the center, you've got to go through the layers on the outside and through the layers on the outside. Just like on this picture with 3 different layers, the tabernacle also had 3 different layers, which we'll go through one by one as we go through. Up first is the outer courtyard, the outer layer of our Russian doll, but there's already a barrier. Physically, there is a curtain stopping us from entering the outer courtyard the whole way round. There is only one entrance to the outer courtyard, one way for the people of Israel to reach God's presence, which is a tiny gap in the curtain to the east. Now, is it just me, or does only having one way to access the presence of God sound familiar to you? In John 14:6, Jesus said to him, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." We have our first reference to Jesus in the tabernacle, and we've not even got inside yet. Strap yourselves in, it's going to be a good talk. So we found the entrance of the tabernacle, right? This one entrance. We just walk in now? Well, yes. Anyone, men, women, foreigners, were allowed into the outer courtyard for general worship and for sacrifice. There were 2 objects, to be found in the outer courtyards. This was my washing up bowl and the matches. These stand for 2 things within the outer courtyard that were used by the Israelites. The first one is the burnt altar, my matches. This was used for animal sacrifices within the Old Testament. They were quite common, obviously to us now quite brutal. But the idea is you would take the most valuable animals, the nicest coats, the best meats, and you would sacrifice them to God. They are the ones that you would notice the loss of more, and so they meant more to God. You would sacrifice their life as an offering to God. And then we have our washing up bowl, or what would be called a laver, L-A-V-E-R. The idea was that you were washing yourselves, you were purifying yourselves, washing the sin and maybe some animal blood off yourself before you got to God, ready to face God. The idea of the water also links to the early idea of baptism, washing ourselves clean of sin before we link to God. So I am in the outer courtyard, the outer layer of the tabernacle. I've sacrificed my goat. I am so sorry for any vegans or vegetarians in the room. I've sacrificed my goat, I've washed my hands, I'm now ready to enter, to see the big guy. Well, not quite. We've got the next layer of our Russian doll, the tabernacle, called the holy place. But there's another problem. There are no women nor non-Jewish people who could enter the holy place. Only priests and high priest could enter the main body of the tent. Now, hold your horses. Before we start the protests, before we get upset, there is a reason. Does anyone remember Sam's talk on the Old Testament a couple of weeks ago? Was anyone here for that? Rules on the Old Testament he spoke about. A few nods, absolutely. If not, catch it up. It's a brilliant talk. Absolutely love Sam's talk. I'm going to steal an analogy from him. All rights go to Sam, so if you don't like it, blame him. He spoke about God's holiness and how as humans, we can be too sinful to enter the presence of God as we are, which is why we need sacrifices, offerings, cleansing, washing, incense. The idea is that if God was fire and we bring anything else close to fire, it will set on fire. Pretty basic concept. But if God is fire and we are unprepared wood, if we bring ourselves close to God, we will burst into flames. God's presence is so powerful, so righteous, that like taking something hot out of an oven, we need to take precautions before we approach. Now, I do want to reassure anyone who is new today and first time in the church that is not the case now. Things are different in our relationship with God. That's where Jesus comes in. Spoiler alert. No one will be bursting into flames today. I know, it's a bit of a shame, isn't it? But back in the day, 2,000 years ago, there was a risk when reaching out to God. Just like the rules of the tabernacle and the wider rules of the Old Testament, they were there to protect the people and yet still allow them to interact with a God that was so holy, just too good for us to comprehend and approach as we are. So, going back to our tabernacle, I'm in the middle sector. I am looking to enter the holy place. I can't enter as Amy. However, luckily enough, I'm now a Jewish priest. Use your imagination. I know it's a stretch. But yeah, I am now a Jewish priest. I'm wearing all the right clothes. I've done my sacrifice. I'm washed. I'm ready to go and meet God. Woo! Let's go. So I walk into the holy place, and there is a really random mix of things in front of me. I have a candlestick, but no candle. I have some wax melts, and I have a chopping board. All you need for go camping, right? Be sorted. But all of these things were significant to be able to reach God. Let's start with the lamp. This candlestick represents the lampstand, or what would be called the menorah. There is a photo up on the board for those who aren't familiar with the menorah. The menorah, hopefully it appears soon. There we go. The menorah is a 7-armed candlestick linked with the Jewish symbol of faith. Menorah translates to mean lamp or light. Lamp or light as a word is used to describe Jesus over 30 times in the New Testament. It is not a coincidence that there is a light in the tabernacle. Then we have our chopping board. This was actually a table. And on this table, there were 12 loaves. 12 loaves for each one of the families of the tribes of Israel. The idea is that this was a reminder to the Israelites that God's provided for them in the desert. When they first arrived in the desert, they had no food and no water. What was the first thing that God provided them with? food and water. The bread which he gave them was called manna, and the water sprung from a rock. The idea is that God provided for the Israelites. This was a reminder of that, and that the Israelites needed to trust in God. Also, bread at a table. Maybe that reminds us of something else. Maybe we think of the communion table. Sharing and the breaking of bread. Who does that remind us of? Say it with me, Jesus. And then, of course, my wax melts or my incense. It's not just for the smell of the camp, though I'm sure 2,000 years ago the hygiene wasn't the best. This altar of incense was there for the high priest to offer incense morning and night on behalf of the Israelite people. The high priest at the time, most people think might have been Moses, but it actually wasn't. It was his brother Aaron. So Aaron, every single morning and every single night, took incense, this lovely smell to God, and burnt it. But he burnt it as a symbol of devotion in prayer. He was praying on behalf of the Israelites to God. Just as it's the idea that Aaron prayed for them and the Israelite people drew closer to God. It's like asking your mate to put in a good word with the boss. It's a word that we called intercession, interceding. Aaron was praying to God on behalf of the Israelite people. And just as Aaron was the high priest doing that 2,000 years ago, as it says in Hebrews 9, Jesus is the New Testament high priest. He meets with God for us and speaks to God on our behalf, and is still doing that today. So a little side note here, I got so excited when I realised this. I'm so sorry. It was just too exciting not to mention. I'm going to jump into the New Testament for a second. I will come back to the tabernacle. In John 1:14, it says, "And the Word, which is Christ, became flesh and dwelt among us." Has anyone ever heard of this Bible verse before? It's quite a popular one. Hopefully you have. But there is another translation I want to draw your attention to. The same verse says in a different translation, "And the Word, that is Christ, became flesh and tabernacled amongst us." The Greek word used here is the word eshkinu, which comes from the same root word as earlier, shkini, means to pitch one's tent or to dwell, to tabernacle. Jesus became flesh and tabernacled amongst us. Jesus is the practical representation of the tabernacle, God's presence on earth. I know. After that bombshell, we're going to return to the tabernacle in the Old Testament. We're going to work our way back. We are now at the center of that Russian doll, the final level of the tabernacle. This is the most important place, the Holy of Holies. This is where God's Spirit resides on earth the strongest. This is the most holy place in the world, like the epicenter of an earthquake. Imagine a glimpse of heaven and the pure power of God in the corner of a tent in the middle of a desert. How intense must that have felt? Intense? Get it? But we wouldn't have known how that felt because none of us would have been allowed into the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle. Only the high priest could enter, following the right purifications and sacrifices to make sure that they were free from sin. And not even then did the high priest get full access 24/7. They didn't have a key, they could just wander in. They were allowed in one day per year, on a day called Yom Kippur, or what they call the Day of Atonement, a day for the Israelites to focus back on their faith and make themselves right with God. And as we spoke about earlier, in terms of the presence of God, the Holy of Holies was a dangerous place. Priests risked death if they weren't prepared properly. Like the most intense maths exam you've ever been to, but if you don't prepare or revise for the exam, you may fail. If you don't prepare or revise for the Holy of Holies, it meant death. Pretty intense. So what is the impressive barrier that stood between the full power of God in the Holy of Holies and the people of Israel? Because there would need to be something substantial, right? It was a curtain. Just a curtain stood between the full power of God and the Israelites. In Exodus 26, "And you shall hang the veil, and the veil shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy." Personally, I don't think I'd be massively reassured by the curtain holding back a full power of God. The Israelites didn't mind it though, so that's all right. Have you noticed the most important theme running throughout the tabernacle so far? I am so reassured that every single item of furniture in the tabernacle points to Jesus. We see Jesus in the sacrifice at the burnt altar. Leviticus mentions a male bull without blemish being sacrificed. Jesus is a man without blemish or sin sacrificed for us. Jesus is in the laver as he washes our sins and opens baptism for all. Jesus is the incense as his prayers create a beautiful aroma to God for us. Jesus is described as the light of the world, as the menorah lit the tabernacle. Jesus is the bread on the table, his body broken for us. Thousands of years before his birth, the signs of Jesus were there. He was there. But even with the signs of Jesus, the rules were still in place, limiting who and how we could reach God. It was an exclusive hierarchy based on gender, race, perceived level of faith. Only certain people, male Jewish people, could access the presence of God. So we fast forward a few hundred years, and the tabernacle becomes the temple, still with the courtyard, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies, those 3 layers of our Russian doll, but now they're made stone. They're more sturdy. But the temple is still divided like the tabernacle. It's still exclusive, and we still can't reach God. But then came Jesus. Jesus entered the scene, the real life. Jesus saw the temple in front of him and saw that it was broken for purpose. In Mark 11:17, when Jesus entered the temple, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations'?" Jesus is calling out the priests for their bias and encouraging full access to the temple. If only they'd listened to Jesus then. But humans, we don't like change. And it had been that way for thousands of years, so why were they going to change it? Because one man said so. But that wasn't just any man. So to allow people to reach God, Jesus did something radical. Jesus gave himself to be crucified, and in doing so, opened the floodgates for God's presence. In Matthew chapter 27:50, it says, "And when Jesus had cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit." At that moment, the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom. The earth shook and the rocks split. Mark 15, Luke 25, they also mention the veil being torn. This wasn't just a small curtain. This 90-foot tall curtain between the holy place and the Holy of Holies being ripped apart, it's not just symbolic. It's so significant. The presence of God that used to be confined in the Holy of Holies was freed by Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. Jesus broke the tabernacle. Jesus broke the boundaries and the rules we had to follow to reach God's presence. Jesus gave us an all-access pass to reach the presence of God. One of my favorite authors when it comes to Christianity is a guy called Pete Greig. In his book, Dirty Glory, he encapsulates some of what we've been talking about today, and I want to read some. The message of Jesus is that God has broken out of the Holy of Holies and is now to be found in the barn, at the party, in the workshop, at dinner with sinners, up the mountain, in the crowd, asleep in the boat, on death row, in the morgue, in the garden, on the beach, cooking breakfast. The Lord of all the earth, who had once apparently been cloistered away somewhere for some, is now everywhere for everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, Elvis has left the building. God has left the tabernacle. And that still applies today. How do we reach God today? Through Jesus. It is all through Jesus. All of this is pointing to Jesus. Now, it's really easy for me to stand here and remind us all, reaching God through Jesus. Let's reach God. But that's sometimes really hard to action. I understand that. I've been there. So I want to set you a challenge today to not go back to the barriers of the tabernacle when we have the all-access pass that Jesus has given us to God. Let's not add our own barriers to restrict our access to God. This may be by thinking, I'm too sinful. I'm too broken. I can't meet God until I've followed all the rules, until I'm perfect, until I achieve something, until I be someone else, until I give that much. I can't get to God. But we don't have to believe that. We really don't. Because Jesus has already torn the curtain. He has covered the sacrifice and preparation so we can come as we are. There may be some people today who feel a bit too broken, a bit too messy right now to come to God in the way that I've described, and that's okay. I felt the same on my walk of faith. I get it. But for those people, I want to encourage you. When we access God, He can change and shape us. Not instantly, but gradually. Not like a bolt of thunder, but like a growing plant, in ways that help us to draw closer to Him. To use the fire analogy that I used earlier for God, we can't draw near fire and not be burned, just as we can't draw near to God and not be changed or transformed. I think within this message of a tabernacle, there's also the wider challenge for the church as well. How can we, as a church, remove the barriers we unknowingly put in place to stop others from reaching God? Are we putting up our own curtain to stop other people reaching God? Are we saying that person isn't clean enough? That person doesn't pray enough? That person's done bad things in the past? That person doesn't give enough to the church? That person hasn't brought their sacrificial bull to church this morning? Shameful. All joking aside, make sure that we are not creating rules to stop others from reaching God. That isn't our job. Our job is to point to Jesus. So may we all be reminded that Jesus opened the door of the Holy of Holies and God's presence once and for all and for everyone. Jesus' sacrifice on the cross covers it all. So we don't need to kill goats or burn candles or wear different clothes or change who we are to be able to draw near to God. We can just come. So come. So come. Let's meet with the presence of God using the authority that Jesus gave us by tearing down that curtain in the tabernacle. Let us be reminded that the dwelling place of God, the creator of all, is here with us, and we can reach him now, today. Let's stand together and pray.